This is the brief on acquiring a new language by listening. We're flipping traditional language learning upside down, teaching flashcards and treating the brain like a pattern-absorbing machine, not a filing cabinet. Have you ever studied a language for years, only to completely freeze when you try to speak? First, build an immersion engine. Listening is the root of all language skills. Flood your brain with 1 to 2 hours of English daily, background listening while doing chores, focused listening for meaning, and pleasure listening to stuff you actually love. Think of a baby. They don't study grammar, they just bathe in sound for 2 years before magically speaking with perfect rhythm. Second, for this sound bath to work, apply the 90% comprehension rule. You got to understand 90% of what you hear, letting your brain grab the remaining 10% naturally from context. Grasping only 50%? Your brain just switches off. You might be thinking, isn't 90% way too easy? No. Easier is the highway to fluency, because easier means your brain can actually bridge those gaps. Finally, now that you're bathing in the right audio, what happens to your ability to actually speak and write? Well, they aren't separate skills to study, they're just the automatic playback, the fruit of what you've heard. That silent period, where you can't speak much, isn't a weakness. It's literally a loading phase, storing thousands of sound patterns. Feel bad at speaking? You just haven't filled your storage yet. Add input, not pressure. Ultimately, native-level fluency isn't built by memorizing rules. It's built by naturally meeting words and grammar patterns through massive, enjoyable listening. Close your grammar books, put on some headphones, and just press play.
Welcome to Daily English Flow. Stay until the end for a special bonus tip. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
So picture this. You studied a new language for years, right?
Oh yeah, we've all been there.
Right. You've dutifully logged into all those colorful apps every single morning just to keep your streak alive.
Got to get those points.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you've memorized these endless vocabulary lists, and you've stared at verb conjugation tables until your eyes literally crossed.
Oh, doing the hard work.
But then the moment actually arrives. Like, you're at a coffee shop or maybe a dinner party, and a native speaker asks you a relatively simple question.
And you just panic.
You just completely freeze.
Yeah.
Suddenly you feel incredibly heavy. Your brain is running this frantic translation process in the background.
Oh, totally.
You're desperately searching for words, and speaking just feels so slow and forced. It's like you're trying to build a sentence on the fly while doing, I don't know, the complex calculus in your head.
It is an incredibly common and, frankly, a really painful experience for adult learners.
It really is.
Because you have all this data in your head, right? But zero actual fluency. And it raises this really fundamental question about our whole approach to language acquisition. Like, why does all that diligent, disciplined, hard work lead to such a paralyzing moment?
Which is exactly what we're getting into today in this deep dive.
Right. And the answer we're looking at in our sources is profoundly simple, though maybe a little tough to hear for some of us.
Let's hear it.
It's because the traditional academic method has us doing it entirely backwards.
When you say backwards, I mean, it really makes me think about how we treat our brains in a classroom setting versus the real world.
Exactly.
We treat the brain like this giant filing cabinet. We try to neatly file away all the past tense verbs in one folder and, the food vocabulary in another folder.
Hoping you can just pull them out later on demand.
Right. But the method we're deep diving into today, which is called the no study, just listen method, it argues that our brains aren't filing cabinets at all.
No, not at all.
They are basically pattern absorbing machines.
Which becomes incredibly obvious when you think about a baby.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, a baby does not sit in a crib studying grammar rules or, flipping through flashcards.
Imagine a baby with flashcards.
Right. A baby doesn't take standardized tests to move on to the next level of English. For the first 1 or 2 years of life, a baby does exactly one thing. It just listens.
It just takes it all in.
Exactly. It is completely bathed in the sounds around it. And then, without any formal study whatsoever, the baby eventually just speaks.
And it happens so naturally, too, with the correct rhythm and grammar and everything.
Yeah, the core premise of our source material today is that the adult brain hasn't lost this ability. We've just, actively chosen to ignore it in favor of textbooks.
It totally reminds me of the mechanics of learning to ride a bike.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, traditional language learning is essentially like trying to learn how to ride a bicycle, by sitting in a sterile classroom reading a physics textbook about gravity and gyroscopic balance.
Which sounds ridiculous when you say it out loud.
Exactly. You can memorize all the formulas for how a bike stays upright, but the second you actually get on the seat, you're going to fall over.
Because the physics don't translate to muscle memory?
Right. The only way to learn is to get on the bike, feel the balance, and let your nervous system just absorb the patterns of movement.
And if we push that bicycle analogy a bit further, the textbook actually becomes a huge liability once you're on the seat.
How so?
Well, if you're consciously trying to calculate the angle of your front wheel while pedaling, you'll crash.
Oh, yeah. You overthink it.
Exactly. That's the freeze you mentioned earlier. When you flood your brain with hours and hours of real, enjoyable sound instead of rules, it quietly extracts the rhythm, the grammar, and the melody all by itself.
So the listening is doing all the heavy lifting.
Right. Listening isn't just one of several language skills you should practice. According to this method, listening is the foundational engine that powers all the rest.
Every native speaker on Earth built their language this way. Sound first, everything else built on top of that sound.
Exactly.
So if we need to, get on the bike and actually start building this engine, we have to look at the practical application of this sound bath.
Yes, the sound bath.
Because I can't imagine anyone achieves true fluency just by having a foreign language playing quietly in the background while they vacuum the house. There has to be some kind of structure to how we listen, right?
There is, yeah. And the source breaks this down into 3 very distinct modes of listening.
Okay, what's the first one?
You actually do start with what they call background listening. This is the passive flooding.
So just having it on in the background.
Exactly.
Huh.
You run audio for 1 to 2 hours daily while you're cooking, cleaning, driving, walking, whatever.
So I don't need to sit there and concentrate.
Nope. Your cognitive effort level is 0. You aren't trying to decode the meaning. You are simply recreating that baby-level environment of being immersed in the phonetic environment.
I see.
Your brain is just absorbing the overarching music of the language, like the cadence, the pauses, the natural speed.
Which, I guess, lays the groundwork. But at some point, the brain actually has to map that sound to meaning, right? Like the passive exposure has to transition into active comprehension.
Right, which transitions us into the second mode, focused listening, or what the source calls the spotlight.
The spotlight, I like that.
Yeah, it's a much shorter burst, about 15 to 20 minutes of relaxed, undivided attention.
Okay, so this is where I'm actually paying attention.
Yes. You sit with a story or a podcast, and you actively follow the narrative. But the key here, and this is crucial, is that you are following the meaning, not the mechanics.
What do you mean by mechanics?
Like no taking notes, no pausing to check a dictionary, no translating the syntax in your head.
Oh, wow. That's hard to resist.
I know, but you just let the story unfold. The moment you grasp the meaning of a phrase in real time, your brain permanently wires that sound to that concept. That instantaneous connection is when true language acquisition happens.
And I imagine that's where the third mode comes in, which the source calls pleasure listening. Because, if I'm forcing myself to spotlight some dense, boring news broadcast just because it's in Spanish and it's quote-unquote good for me,
you're going to hate it.
Yeah, I'm going to burn out in a week. But if I'm listening to a comedy podcast or like a gripping true crime story, I'm basically tricking my brain into paying attention.
Well, and it's not just about tricking yourself to maintain a habit. There's a massive neurological advantage here.
Really? Like what?
Emotion acts as a catalyst for memory retention. When you are genuinely entertained or surprised or laughing, your amygdala is activated.
Okay.
And that signals to your hippocampus that this information is highly relevant. Your brain absorbs significantly more data from content you actually care about than from, say, a sterile textbook audio dialogue about going to the post office.
Oh, that makes total sense. So pleasure isn't just a nice bonus for this method.
No, it is the primary fuel for the acquisition engine.
Okay, but I have to push back on this a little bit.
Go for it.
Because I think a lot of analytical learners are going to hit a wall right here.
How so?
Well, if I just put on a compelling, highly emotional Swedish podcast right now, and I don't know a single word of Swedish, isn't that just useless noise?
Right.
Like, no matter how much I enjoy the tone of the hosts, how does the brain go from literal noise to structured language if I don't study the translation first? I could listen for 10 hours and still not know what they were saying.
That is the exact trap most beginners fall into when they hear just listen.
Okay, so I'm not crazy.
No, you are completely right. If you understand 0% of the audio, it is just acoustic noise. And your brain will eventually just tune it out to save energy.
So how do we bridge that gap?
To bridge the gap between noise and language, the source introduces the most critical rule of the entire framework, the 90% comprehension rule.
Okay, the 90% rule. Why 90%? What's happening neurologically at that specific threshold?
It's all about cognitive load and context.
Oh.
If you listen to something where you understand 100%, it's a great confidence booster, sure, but you aren't acquiring any new vocabulary. It's stagnant.
Right. You're not learning anything new.
Exactly. Now, if you drop down to 50% comprehension, the cognitive load is just too heavy. There are too many missing pieces, and your brain can't construct the wider meaning, so it gets frustrated and shuts down.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's just too much work.
But 90% is the Goldilocks zone. When you understand 90% of the words in a sentence, your brain uses the surrounding context, like the tone of voice, the physical situation, the words you do know, to subconsciously triangulate what that unknown 10% means.
Oh, that's fascinating. So it's like solving a puzzle in real time.
Exactly. And because your brain solved it organically, it anchors that new word deeply into your memory.
That makes a lot of sense. You're giving the brain enough scaffolding to climb higher.
Right.
And I guess the way to guarantee you have that scaffolding is to constantly self-evaluate.
Right.
The source suggests testing your audio, right? Like after a minute, ask yourself if you genuinely know what is happening.
Yes, you have to be honest with yourself.
And if you don't, you have to put your ego aside and choose easier content. Because easier isn't a sign of weakness. It's just providing the necessary context for the brain to do its triangulation work.
And once you find that sweet spot of comprehensible, enjoyable input, the goal is volume.
How much volume are we talking?
The method calls for hitting roughly 365 hours a year of listening.
Wow. That sounds pretty intimidating.
It does, until you realize it requires 0 dedicated study blocks.
Right, because of the background listening.
Exactly. It's about auditing the dead spaces in your day. 10 minutes of a simple story while making coffee, 20 minutes of a podcast during the commute instead of the local radio, 20 minutes of background audio while folding laundry.
The source even mentions 10 minutes of a relaxing story right before sleep, which initially sounded a bit intense to me.
Yeah, sounds like a lot.
But the argument is that your brain continues to process and consolidate those phonetic patterns as you drift into the early stages of sleep. It's a way to squeeze out every drop of acquisition.
And if you stack all those little moments, you easily hit 60 minutes a day, which yields that massive 365-hour benchmark over a year.
Which brings us to the inevitable next phase.
Right.
Because once that sound bath has been running for a few months and your brain is saturated with this 90% comprehensible audio, the natural impulse for any driven adult learner is going to be, all right, I've absorbed enough. It's time to start talking.
Right. And that's where the source provides an instruction that feels incredibly counterintuitive for high achievers.
What's that?
Stop forcing it.
Just stop.
Just stop. If you feel slow or clumsy at speaking early on, you aren't broken and you don't lack talent. You are just trying to harvest the fruit before the root system is fully developed.
So speaking is the last thing that happens.
Speaking is the absolute last skill to emerge. It is the output of all your input. In linguistics, this period of absorption is known as the silent period.
The silent period.
Yeah, and adults often view a reluctance to speak as a failure, but neurologically, it is a crucial loading phase. While you are silent, your brain is busy cataloging thousands of sound patterns, storing ready-made phrases, and aligning your phonetic expectations.
I think of the silent period like filling up a water balloon.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, like if you put an empty balloon over a faucet and immediately try to squeeze it, nothing is going to happen. It's just going to feel rigid and empty.
Right.
Which is exactly what trying to force a conversation on week 2 feels like.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But if you just hold that balloon under the faucet, which is our daily sound bath, and leave it alone, you don't even have to squeeze. The water pressure builds until the balloon eventually bursts, and the language just naturally overflows on its own.
That overflowing water is a perfect representation of how effortless speaking becomes if you wait.
Yeah.
During the silent period, you are subconsciously building your accent without doing a single mouth exercise.
Wait, really? Without even trying?
Yeah. Your vocal cadence naturally becomes the average of the voices you spend the most time listening to. If you bathe in the natural rhythm of the language daily, your brain maps those motor patterns.
That's wild.
Eventually, you'll find yourself spontaneously reacting to a situation with a complete, perfectly conjugated sentence like, I wouldn't do that if I were you. And you'll realize you never actually studied the conditional tense.
It just comes out.
Your brain just handed you the phrase as a gift from your listening hours.
But, I mean, I know our listeners, and telling an ambitious adult to just remain entirely mute for months is a really tough sell.
It's very hard.
So how do we transition from the silent period to active speaking without, prematurely squeezing the water balloon?
Well, the source outlines 3 gentle practices, and gentle really is the operative word here.
Okay, lay 'em on me.
It's all about low-stakes playback. The first practice is the echo. While you're doing your pleasure listening, you occasionally just repeat a short phrase you enjoyed exactly as you heard it.
So just mimicking them.
Yeah, you're mimicking the emotion and the melody, not just reciting the words, like echoing a dramatic, "You've got to be kidding me," from a TV show. It's essentially shadowing, but without the rigorous academic pressure.
It's exactly like singing along to your favorite song on the radio. You aren't analyzing the sheet music, you're just writing the melody.
Spot on.
And that leads into the second practice, which is self-talk playback. When you're alone at home, you start narrating your life using the sentences your listening has gifted you. Things like, "I need to find my keys," or "It's cold outside."
Right, and the critical distinction there is that you are not constructing these sentences from scratch.
Oh, I see.
You aren't thinking subject plus verb plus object. You are simply pressing play on a sound file your brain has already stored. Playback must always precede original creation.
That takes so much pressure off.
It really does, which is why the third practice, the 1% speaking rule, is so vital. In the beginning, you restrict your speaking to just 1% of your listening time.
Just 1%.
Yeah. An hour of input earns you 1 minute of output. Over the months, as your storage tank fills, that ratio naturally shifts to 5, then 10, then 30%.
And limiting your output like that prevents what the source calls the trap.
Oh, yes, the trap.
We've all been there. You try to force a complex 30-minute conversation with a native speaker way too early.
Oh, it's brutal.
You stumble, you translate everything literally, you feel profound embarrassment, and you inevitably conclude, "I just don't have the brain for languages."
Which is a tragic and completely incorrect conclusion.
Right.
Every time you stumble or freeze in early speaking, it's not a sign of failure. It is merely a biological signal from your brain that the storage tank is running low and needs more audio input.
Wow. So the solution is never to add more pressure.
Never. The solution is always to return to the sound bath. Stop pushing the river and let it flow at its own pace.
Which brings up a really interesting pivot. If speaking is just the natural physical overflow of the audio we've absorbed, how does this method handle text?
Right, reading and writing.
Because in a traditional classroom, reading and writing are treated as entirely separate mountains you have to climb, complete with their own agonizing workbooks.
This framework flips that entirely. Reading and writing are not new, isolated skills to conquer from scratch. They are simply visual mirrors of your listening.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, think about it. If you read a word on a page that you have already heard spoken in context 100 times, reading it is completely effortless.
True.
Your brain already knows its sound, its core meaning, and its emotional weight. You are just attaching a visual symbol to an existing concept.
So the golden order here is hear first, read second.
Exactly.
The source warns heavily against what they call dead words. Like if you encounter a brand new word exclusively on a piece of paper and you memorize its dictionary definition, it remains a dead word.
Yep, it has no life.
You might know it intellectually, but you have no phonetic memory of it, no feel for its rhythm. You can't deploy it dynamically in conversation. Reading has to be built on a foundation of sound.
And to do that practically, the source suggests techniques that bridge the auditory and the visual. The first is listen and look, which is simply utilizing captions.
Oh, like on YouTube or Netflix?
Yeah. You watch a video in the target language with the target language subtitles turned on. This forces your brain to simultaneously link the phonetic sound hitting your ear with the orthographic spelling hitting your eye.
So those weird spelling rules finally make sense.
Right. Bizarre spelling rules suddenly stop being confusing because the sound and the text are permanently fused together in your neural pathways.
I love the story replay technique for this too. You take a short, engaging story and listen to the pure audio first. Then you listen a second time while following along with the transcript.
Right.
And finally, you read the transcript in silence. By the time you get to the silent reading, the text feels incredibly easy to digest because the rhythm and the cadence of the narrator's voice are already echoing in your head. The text just comes alive.
And that living text allows you to build an easy library.
An easy library.
Yeah, this means reading materials that are comfortably within your comprehension level. Graded readers, graphic novels, or simple articles about your personal hobbies.
Stuff you actually want to read.
Exactly. You read them purely for the joy of the narrative, without stopping to translate or decode grammar. You are essentially just listening with your eyes.
But the massive pitfall to avoid here is bringing the academic mindset into your reading. If you pick up a dense literary novel and you have to consult a dictionary 10 times on a single page, the cognitive friction is just way too high.
It's exhausting.
Hard material plus painful interruptions plus tiny amounts of progress is the absolute formula for burnout. You want easy, enjoyable material that allows for massive volume.
Exactly, which seamlessly transitions us into writing. The foundational secret to writing in this method is acknowledging that you cannot write what you have not absorbed.
So it all comes back to the input.
Yes, your writing should just be the physical playback of everything your ears have stored.
So the practices for writing basically mirror the gentle speaking practices. There's the echo journal, where you write 3 simple sentences before bed. But they must be thoughts or phrases you actually heard that day, not sentences you built using a translation dictionary.
Right.
Or transcript copy, where you slowly handwrite a few lines from a podcast transcript just to physically feel the flow of native syntax.
And the self-chat, where you use a notes app to essentially text yourself throughout the day using only the echoes of your stored sentences. But this brings up a huge point of friction for adult learners.
Oh.
What's that?
The ego.
Yes. I was just about to ask about this on behalf of the ambitious listeners out there. It's a real hurdle. As a smart, complex adult who is used to articulating highly nuanced thoughts, it feels incredibly frustrating to be restricted to writing childish sentences like, "The dog is big," or "I went to the store."
It does feel limiting.
We want to express our adult ideas, so we write a complex paragraph in our native language and then run it through a translation app to see how to say it. And that is what the source brilliantly calls building a museum of translations.
A museum of translations. Wow.
It looks impressive, but it's completely hollow. When you force complex thoughts through a translator, you aren't building neural pathways, you're just doing data entry. It creates an illusion of fluency.
So what's the alternative?
You must train yourself to write small and true. Only write the structures your ears already genuinely own. 10 simple, deeply absorbed sentences that you can produce effortlessly are vastly superior to one complex, translated paragraph that you will forget by tomorrow.
Your writing must honestly mirror your listening.
Exactly.
Okay, we've covered the mechanics of listening, echoing, and mirroring. But for the deeply analytical listeners, the ones who just love structure and rules, we have to address the elephant in the room.
The grammar and vocabulary.
Exactly. How do we actually learn what specific words mean or how to string them together accurately if we are expressly forbidden from memorizing definitions or studying grammar structures? Let's unpack the invisible machines, starting with vocabulary.
This is where we have to trust the cognitive process of spaced repetition. Native speakers possess vocabularies of 20,000 words or more. They obviously didn't learn those through flashcards.
No one has time for that many flashcards.
Right. They acquired them through incidental vocabulary acquisition. They met those words naturally in various emotional contexts over a long period of time, and the brain automatically deduced and stored the meanings.
The source quantifies this with the 7 exposure rule. Research indicates that a word truly becomes yours after you encounter it roughly 7 to 10 times in meaningful contexts.
Yep.
The first time you hear it, you might just guess the gist from the situation. By the 3rd meeting, you recognize the sound. By the 5th, you start to intuitively feel its nuance. And by the 7th exposure, the word is fully anchored in your memory, ready to be used. No dictionary was ever involved.
So the goal is to guarantee you get those organic exposures. You do this through a story flood, where a single 10-minute narrative might expose you to 50 highly useful, high-frequency words in context.
Love that.
Or you use the narrow listening trick, which is incredibly effective.
I found the narrow listening trick so fascinating. Instead of jumping randomly from news to comedy to history, you spend 2 solid weeks listening almost exclusively to one specific niche you enjoy.
Like cooking.
Yeah, exactly, like culinary shows.
Yeah.
Because of the limited scope of the topic, the vocabulary naturally loops. You hear words like simmer, chop, and ingredients dozens of times across different videos.
Right.
Because you have the visual context of a chef chopping an onion, your brain bypasses the dictionary entirely and links the sound directly to the action. Within a fortnight, you own the vocabulary of that entire domain.
And during this process, you have to train yourself to tolerate ambiguity. The source talks about the glow of a noticed word.
The glow.
Yeah. When you're listening and a specific word keeps popping up, you almost know what it means. It feels familiar. Your brain is signaling that it's prepping a slot in your memory for it. The academic urge is to pause the audio and look it up immediately. But the acquisition mindset says, let the audio play. Trust the spaced repetition.
Just let it be.
Trust that the word will return, and when it does, the context will finally lock it in. Words need to live in stories, enveloped in sound and emotion, not isolated on a flashcard where they lose all their vitality.
So if vocabulary is acquired incidentally, that leaves the most feared machine of all, grammar.
Oh, grammar.
This is the hardest life raft for people to let go of.
Yeah.
We are conditioned to believe that without studying the rules, we will speak in broken, chaotic gibberish forever.
It's a terrifying leap for many, but it's the most liberating truth in language learning. Native speakers do not know grammar rules.
It's true.
If you stop a native English speaker on the street and ask them to explain the mechanical difference between the present perfect and the simple past, they will stare at you blankly.
I would stare you blankly.
Exactly, but if you ask them which one to use, they will instantly pick the correct one, simply because the alternative sounds wrong.
Because they are operating on implicit learning. When you hear the correct phrasing 1,000 times, your brain silently maps the underlying pattern without you ever knowing a rule exists.
Yes.
I look at this exactly like learning the rules of a sport. Imagine trying to understand basketball. You could sit down with the official NBA rulebook and try to memorize the technical definitions of a traveling violation or a blocking foul.
Which would be so boring.
Incredibly boring. But if you just sit on the couch and watch 100 games on TV over a season, you absorb the rules through the patterns of play. Nobody explains the mechanics to you, but by the playoffs, you are instinctively yelling at the TV when a player travels because the physical movement just looks wrong to your brain.
And to take that basketball analogy to its logical conclusion, if you pause the game every time a player dribbled to consult the official rulebook and verify the legality of the move, you would completely destroy the flow of the game.
You wouldn't even be playing anymore.
You'd be paralyzed, which is exactly what happens when we try to speak a language but constantly pause to consult our mental grammar rulebook. It forces slow, robotic, translated speech.
So how do we build that grammar implicitly?
To build your implicit grammar, you use the pattern flood. You don't study a chart on the past tense. You listen to 50 stories told in the past tense. You soak in the pattern until it becomes second nature.
You can also actively collect these patterns through sentence collection. When you hear a beautifully constructed, complex sentence in your listening, you don't break it down into its grammatical components. You just adopt the whole sentence as a perfect, ready-made template.
Right.
And then, when it's time to speak, you rely entirely on the sound right test. You don't ask, is this correct according to page 42 of my textbook? You simply ask your intuition, does this sound right to my ear?
The ear is the ultimate arbiter of grammar.
Exactly. The textbook is merely a map of the territory, but the ear is the territory itself.
Which perfectly summarizes the monumental paradigm shift this method demands. You are moving from a state of conscious decoding to subconscious absorption.
Exactly. To distill everything we've explored today, language is not an academic subject you study. It is a biological environment you live in.
Beautifully put.
You start by building the engine with the sound bath, ensuring you hit that 90% comprehension sweet spot. You allow the silent period to do its vital neurological work without forcing early speech.
Yep.
You let your reading and writing naturally mirror the sounds you've absorbed, avoiding that museum of translations. And you trust the invisible machines of incidental acquisition and implicit learning to handle your vocabulary and grammar.
And for those ready to actually test this, the source leaves us with a highly actionable challenge, the 30-day listening challenge.
Tell them what it is.
For the next 30 days, commit to 60 minutes a day of pure, enjoyable listening in your target language. No textbooks, no flashcards, no translating, just immersive sound.
And then what?
On day 30, record yourself speaking for 1 minute and compare the rhythm, the cadence, and the lack of mental friction to how you sound today. The physical difference in your fluency will be undeniable.
It is a radical departure from everything we're taught in school, but The logic is incredibly sound.
It is. And if we, zoom out from language for a moment, this entire framework leaves us with a truly expansive question to ponder.
What is that?
We've just explored how incredibly sophisticated the human brain is as a pattern-absorbing machine, capable of mastering complex systems purely through massive, pleasurable exposure.
Right.
If this is true for language, what other complex skills in our adult lives are we currently agonizing over, trying to study the hard way that we should actually just be absorbing?
Oh, wow.
Like, could we